Well, hello. This is going to be a fun vlog, I think for me and for you. I don't know what I'm going to call this vlog as the theme. It's going to be books I should have read by now, or probably like my book shame, because these are books that I pre-ordered and I still have not read. One of them is from 2023. So let's quickly talk through the books and then dive into reading them. I am very excited for them. I was very excited for them before they came out, and now they've been out for months or more than a year, and I still haven't read them. So, number one, The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I've read some of Jackson Bennett's work, the Foundry Side series, and loved it. He's fantastic at magic systems and world building. I've heard this has a mystery component to it, somewhat, very genre blendy. Seems like it's kind of fungally horror elements. I really want to read it. And I still haven't. Next, The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. I ordered this specialty copy from the UK, and I still haven't read it. I have read everything Catherine Arden has put out, both her adult and children's works, and loved them. So I think I'm very much going to like this one. This is historical fantasy set around World War II, and I've heard it's very atmospheric, which is always the buzzword for Arden's work. And I just haven't gotten to it. And lastly, this one might be a little bit more in doubt. And that's Witch King by Martha Wells. The very famous author of the Murderbot series in science fiction, this is her most recent fantasy series to come out, or start. And I've heard very mixed things, but from people who are kind of in my more thoughtful, character-driven fantasy side of things, seem to like this a lot more than the people who just know and love her Murderbot series and are looking for kind of propulsive action, somewhat. So, I don't know. This could go either way because it's had a lot of very mixed reviews. But I want to read it and I still haven't read it. It's been out since 2023. So, those are the books we will be diving into for this vlog. Okay, I'm only about 30 pages into The Tainted Cup, but I am completely sucked into this. Wow. The world building is so cool so far, and we have just barely scratched the surface. There definitely is like a big military element to this. There was a whole like list of rankings of military roles at the beginning, and that clearly is present, but it doesn't feel like a super military fantasy as far as what I've read so far. There also definitely is this sort of Sherlock, gender-swapped Sherlock and Watson vibe, where we have Din is the character we've been following so far. And Din is sort of the Watson character. He has this special role and magical ability, I would say, to record memories in himself. And he has to do that by associating them with a smell. So they have this kind of loose nickname of glass sniffers because they're like constantly sniffing bottles. And so he is there to investigate and to record exactly what he sees at the scene of a crime. It's not clear if it's a murder, but you know right away. So I don't think this is a spoiler, but somebody basically had a tree burst out of them. And so he's at the scene of this crime and investigating, questioning everybody. And then he leaves and goes to Anna, who is his boss, who is the Sherlock character. And she is wild. She's this extremely big personality. She's like trying to convince him to get her psychedelic drugs. It is very Sherlockian. She's very over the top, and she doesn't seem to take anything seriously, but she's extremely smart at putting things together, obviously. She's also got something going on strange. She's blindfolded. So that's unusual. But she doesn't seem to be blind. So lots of quirks of the characters. I'm very, very immersed in this, and I just want to continue on reading it. So I'm gonna go do that. This is such a cool world. I'm utterly obsessed. Listen to this a little bit.
"What's that, ma'am?" I asked. "An engineering quake instrument," she said. "When the earth below moves at all, just shakes the tiniest bit, the weight tries to stay in place and bounces against the string. It takes a lot to calibrate it right, but if you do it, it can be very sensitive. For example, you can't feel the earth shaking now, can you, Din?" The earth is shaking, I said. Right now? Truly? You're probably accustomed to it, having been here for so long. But yes, the earth is shaking right now. I watched as the little weight bounced against the string and felt my skin go cold. It's shaking, I said. It's shaking because... Yes, she said quietly. What we are witnessing, Din, are the quakes from the sea floor about 200 leagues away, as a leviathan slowly churns its way through the bottom of the ocean toward the coast. I stared at the bouncing weight. The atonal chiming suddenly seemed far louder. Must be a big one, said Anna, grinning. Let's hope the seawalls hold, eh? It feels wrong because it is wrong, Din, she said. Civilization is often a task that's only barely managed. But harden your heart and slow your blood. The towers of justice are built one brick at a time. We have more to build yet. Man, does that really hit hard right now. I am finished and I loved this. This is so weird and strange. It kind of reminds me of Gideon the Ninth in terms of the tone, the really unusual genre blend that is extremely mystery forward. I think going into this, I really expected fungal horror, and it's not. It's really, really not horror-y at all. It's primarily mystery plot with an intriguing kind of fantasy, I guess. It's magical, but the fantasy feels more like classic sci-fi, like golden age sci-fi, I guess, where everything is kind of biological and very scientifically based. Like, it's the old-timey thing where this is a world that so much about the actual magic that we're talking about is plant-based. But that also extends to things like how they build. They're using plants in ways to build homes and certain types of plant materials for structures that are better at dealing with earthquake type situations. So things like that, where it is very sciencey. But then they're also kind of making potions. They're doing biological body grafts situations, things like that kind of are more magical, but again in a sciencey way. We also have, again, a classic sci-fi vibe in that there are these massive leviathan creatures. And we have almost like a Northern Wall situation with that you would see in Game of Thrones, except it's a seawall. And so much of this society's resources are centered around upkeep and building and engineering of infrastructure to keep these leviathans out of civilization and keep the wall maintained, keep military extremely strong. And so that all is this huge element to the story. But we're also hearing about elements of economy and class. And that plays a big role because we have powerful sort of guild trading houses, and the dynamics of power are extremely ingrained in this story, of who has the power, of how they leverage the military and military connections, and things like that play into this massively in terms of the world building. So there are just so many layers there to talk about. The systems of how they sort of patronize military members, the guild houses do, in order to enrich themselves and make connections and build their power because the military has so much power, and on and on and on. It's really, really interesting. This is just intricate, really, really intricate. So yeah, this is so inventive and different from anything I've ever read before. It's got such a mix and blend of things. Din and Anna have the most wonderful dynamic between them. Like, Din is very timid and buttoned up. And then Anna is all over the place. This is just wild, entertaining, funny character. And I feel like there's so much more to learn about them as characters. So I'm super happy that this series will be continuing on. Though as far as I know, it's continuing on as kind of a companion series where we will be getting a new mystery in the next book. So that's very, very intriguing. I did feel like I kind of clocked I don't want to spoil anything here, but I kind of clocked the resolutions. There were multiple resolutions. So I kind of clocked where we were going, but I still was surprised by outcomes every time things came up.
And it just was delivered so well. So the actual mystery plot was fantastic as well. Yeah, and I feel it's solvable because I spotted things along the way that led me to where we were going. Yeah, it was just all around great. I devoured this. I didn't want to put it down, so I think this was a big time win, and I'm glad I got to it finally. So now, I believe we will next be on to Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. Progress update on Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. I am not very far in. I'm a few chapters in, and so far it is everything that you expect. It's what people pitch in the elevator pitch, definitely. Laura is this character who gets word that her brother has died at war. This is in 1918. And she has reasons, both internal doubts and also external things, that kind of tell her there's reason to think he may not be dead, actually. So, of course, she wants to go find him and prove he's not actually dead. So that is the elevator pitch you kind of get. But also, there's so much more to this than that already. We're starting in Halifax. And Laura is someone who herself has been to war as a nurse and comes back. And she's haunted by ghosts of that. So she's still very much recovering from that, on top of things that have happened at home in Halifax. There was this big tragedy. As far as I know, this is a real event, and I remember hearing in depth about it somewhere, but I don't remember where. And this rings very true to the real event. But she has lost family members because there was a tragedy where a boat exploded on the harbor outside of Halifax, and it impacted not just the boat, but people and homes along the coastline, and there was a massive loss of life. And so she is dealing with grief and loss from that as well. So there is that real complexity to her as a character. But what is so important to get across is, as always, Arden just transports you there. Literally, as soon as I started reading, it's just like, shoop, you are in the place as you're reading it, and it feels like it's all around you. It's like an immersion tank of a book, and that's very true to Arden's writing style. So I'm really loving this. I am so happy to have finally picked it up. So I will be, I'm sure, continuing on very rapidly because it's kind of unputdownable and it's not that long. I have absolutely devoured this today. I'm 230 pages in, so over the halfway mark, and I wanted to kind of check in on folklore, I guess, because that is a huge element here, and I think Arden has established herself as somewhat of a folklore queen. So I don't know how much of this is her own creation and how much of it is real folklore is a question. The kind of main speculative element to this ties into what is explained in the book as urban legends and folklore passed around between soldiers in the battlefield, on the front lines. And I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's actual history or if it's something that she came up with for the story, but it feels so realistic. Like, this is completely something you could see being historically valid that soldiers of the time would have talked about. And then it's delivered in this incredible, very tangible way. And I love that. So I'm not going to talk about what that speculative element is because there really only is kind of this one speculative element and everything else is very grounded, and kind of even this speculative element feels very grounded. But then we also, in addition to that have an aspect that I feel like might not be intentional. It could be intentional, but I feel like certainly is at least part of the author's consciousness being infused so much with folklore, that we're delivered a trio of women characters who are fantastic. I adore Pym. When you get to know these characters, they're great. But Laura remains our kind of main character. The trio of women, though, very much seem to me to play out as a mother maiden crone situation. So was that intentional, or is that just that folklore is such a part of the author's psyche and experience and knowledge that unintentionally that was what she delivered? I don't know, but I love it. Love it. So I'm going to continue on. I probably will not finish this today, but probably tomorrow, because this is fantastic. Rue has needs today. So I have finished The Warm Hands of Coasts by Catherine Arden, and it was lovely. It's kind of very eerie while not being scary, and it feels entirely grounded. So the whole thing feels like it could be historical, though there is a very definite speculative element. I don't think I've really talked about Freddie's story so far when I've checked in. Freddie is obviously the brother that Laura is looking for, and we do have the timeline labeled at the top of the chapter, so you know going in right away. I think I mentioned Laura's story starts in 1918, but Freddie's story starts in 1917, so you know we're kind of working to converge. We don't know if he is or is not alive as we're getting to know his story. But very rapidly, Freddie is trapped in a pillbox and kind of underground with a German soldier. And during this period of being trapped, they sort of form a connection, and it's this really beautiful story of the relationship that they form through language barrier. Hi. Oh, hi. Okay, no face kisses. Through the language barrier. Okay, we got rid of the cat. So I can't remember what I was saying. I think I was saying that they kind of have this connection despite the language barrier, and it's such a quiet, intimate story where they're overcoming a bias and prejudice that they've been trained to have by necessity, to see one another as inhuman and something other than human because they're on opposing sides of a war. And yet they're finding that beautiful human connection with one another. It's just a very, very quiet, intimate story. It's lovely. Yeah, it's very different from what you would expect, given it's in the midst of war. And meanwhile, Laura's story, she's desperate and ranging around trying to find any information about Freddie that she can. And what I think is so effective about this is that it really gets across the bleakness and brutality and hopelessness of war, but in a way that's not usual, because usually you get the big things that are happening. You get the key battles and major victories or losses, the truly gruesome stuff. But this is the day-to-day, bone-deep hopelessness that they were going through. The ways that choices or things that they had to do would affect them for the rest of their lives if they lived at all beyond this. Just the most minor details are really enriching here. And so you deeply connect and feel the sort of day-to-day living of being engaged in a war, much more so than the big occurrences. Yeah, it's incredible. As always, I think Arden is a master of telling these kind of folkloric, historical fantasy stories. And so this was the last remaining book of hers that I have to read. So I will be absolutely waiting for any new work she puts out. I very quickly have gotten through 100 pages of Witch King, about a quarter of the book. It's not super duper long. It's very interesting and not the kind of traditional medieval-y fantasy that I was expecting. So that is good. We open this book with the character Kai, and it seems like we're following just that character as our POV. And Kai wakes up looking down on his body, clearly dead. So I think there was a big miss in not calling this like the Lich King, because that's pretty close to what he is at this point. He's looking down on his body. The sepulcher where he's been entombed apparently was filled with water and has been drained, and his body is inside of a glass coffin. All of that because
he is a demon / witch. Those terms seem to be used interchangeably, where demons are also called witches, but perhaps the term witch encompasses beyond just demons. So I'm still learning about that aspect of the world building. And he wakes up and he has kind of a mental connection with at least one other person who he now is trying to figure out what has gone on. He's been dead for some time and entombed in this sepulcher. And there are these, not people, but other demons, other magical beings that he cares about, that he's trying to figure out what has happened in the intervening time. There is also at the bigger aspect. So he's following the thread of this personal mystery of how did he come to be dead, basically. But he is a demon, so he's immortal. So someone clearly took the effort to make sure he wasn't going to come back, more or less. And the bigger macro plot, we're jumping back and forth between this present mystery and following him as he uncovers that, with the past as his childhood. And because he's immortal, I don't actually know how long past that is, but it's clear that there was kind of a different world order at that time, where there is a group, I'm not even going to bother with names because there's a lot of world building to this, but there's a group that more or less were oppressive over the demons and kind of had power in the world over the demons, enslaved them, and were very much mistreating them. So in the present timeline, that clearly has been overcome and fallen away and is very much past. But it seems there is a power rising or a movement toward rebuilding that oppression of the demons, possibly. So yeah, there is this very big kind of political plot to this that's growing, along with this very personal stakes mystery of why he's been entombed and like physically killed and entombed. So very intrigued by this. It's really, really different from, I think, anything I've read. And I was not expecting this kind of demon plot that this has. As I said, this kind of should have been the Lich King, because he's dead, he's immortal, he has powers to drain life. I think that would have pulled a lot more people into this. I've made it about halfway through The Witch King, and it is moving along quickly, so I think I might try to finish this today. It's going very well, and the past timeline I think is most compelling to me right now, because we are definitely following the political progression and machinations leading up to the fall of that powerful, oppressive group, the hierarchs, that I mentioned earlier. And it's very interesting. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes conflict and plotting, certainly. So this is much more political and slow-paced than I was expecting. We also have epigraphs all throughout at the chapter headers that are supposedly historical documents, kind of referencing elements about the hierarchs specifically. So that is certainly the main plot of this story. But then in the future timeline, it doesn't seem like it's really the hierarchs coming back. It's something else that is building as an oppressive power in the future plot. But that hasn't quite materialized yet. So I think the second half, we're going to delve into that much more. And I'm very excited to see what it is. We did it. We finished the book and the vlog. There's not much I can talk about in the second half specifically without spoilers, so I'm going to avoid that. But I would say this feels much more like non-Western fantasy than kind of traditional fantasy, and that was unexpected. I really enjoyed the characters, and the elements of world building are very strong here. But it's a real different experience if you are coming into this expecting like Murderbot, Martha Wells writing. This is not that. It's still clearly her voice, but it is very different. So I think as we got toward the end, this probably was not quite a 5-star, but was very close, mainly because the balance between the past timeline and the present timeline shifted, and we were mostly spending time in the past timeline. And I wanted kind of more of the present timeline, really. And it seems like this is going to be a continuing series, so I'm assuming that's where we're going to focus as it goes along.
But yeah, I did want more of that present timeline. So many things about this are really interesting in terms of the world building. It's very dense and very political, for sure. The magic systems are definitely kind of coherent and internally consistent while not being like hard magic systems. They're not completely fleshed out. But we do have really cool like life and death magic, obviously, as I alluded to earlier because of this whole demon and witch thing. But then we additionally have different forms of sort of earth magic as well. And so there's a number of those elements, but coming from a background of like tabletop role-playing games, personally, I don't think this will be meaningful or is important if you're not familiar. But if you are, perhaps useful to know that things like cantrips and setting your magical intentions are very big elements of this. So it definitely had that vibe of tabletop role-playing gaming without ever actually engaging with pulling in the gaming element directly. Yeah, so it kind of gave me some of those feels of reading old Dragonlance books and stuff where it feels very connected to gaming. Yeah, so I just enjoyed this very much. In general, it's a real different experience from traditional Martha Wells. It's very heavy and, as I said, political, very world building focused, while also still having the tone that you expect from Martha. That's one of the things I gripe about with sort of big epic fantasy, is it being one note emotionally. And this isn't. It really has that variance. It has both the serious and dramatic. This is mostly dramatic, but it has moments of levity and humor. There's a child character who very often she will see things that other people don't because they're overthinking it. And she's just kind of like, well, obviously this thing is going on. And she's not annoying as a child. I did really appreciate that. So I think that overall, so this was probably my lowest rated of the 3 for this blog, but I would still put this at like a 4.5 star. So I feel like success here in that I know my own taste. I was correct in pre-ordering all 3 of these books. And whether I got to them when I pre-ordered them or now, I still got to really enjoy them. But really, I should be getting to my pre-orders more quickly after I get them. Because, yeah, otherwise these books that I really, really enjoyed are just sitting on my shelves. So, I believe that's it for the vlog. I appreciate all of you joining me for this journey in verifying my tastes, verifying my judgment in pre-orders, and also my self-shaming about the fact that these have been sitting on my shelves for a year plus. So that is all for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.